Lord Jesus, may we know your blessing. Amen. Well, we're looking at what are often called the Beatitudes, the 9 blessings which Jesus pronounces at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verses 1 to 12. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and so on. It's a difficult word, blessed or blessed. It means slightly different things in different places. It means different things according to context, according to who's saying it, and so on. And it's not been entirely easy for Bible translators to make it clear. Most Bible translations go with blessed are the poor in spirit and so on. Some of you, the oldies like me, may remember a bit of argy-bargy when the Good News Bible came out a long time ago. First of all, Good News for Modern Man, that dates it. And then the Good News New Testament, and then the whole Good News Bible, which was a very worthy attempt at making a Bible readable, particularly for those for whom English was a second language. So it tried not to use difficult words, which is in itself a problem with the Bible because there are some difficult words there. And they translated this as happy are instead of blessed. And quite a lot of clever theologians and traditional church people got quite upset at that. Oh, it isn't about being happy. Blessed is rather different from that. You can be almost blessed and still miserable, but certainly it isn't the same as happy, people said. Actually, happy is a big part of it. And I think that was a very worthy attempt, though I wouldn't see it quite that way. Tom Wright, in his excellent, thoughtful translation of the New Testament, which does make you stop and ponder quite often, he goes for blessings on the poor in spirit. I get that, but it sounds almost more like a wish rather than a reality. I'm sure that isn't what he meant, but blessings on the poor in spirit may be another way of reading it. I think when Jesus says blessed are, he really means they are blessed. He's not wishing them blessing, he's declaring them blessed. He's declaring blessing. He's saying these people are truly right with God. God's with them. God's on their side. God is blessing them. They are truly happy in a deep sense because they are right with God. It's a difficult idea, and particularly when we see how it works and what these 9 blessings are all about, who they're for, and what the blessing actually means. Just to remind ourselves of the immediate background, Jesus has seen the crowds, he's gone up on the mountain, and he sits down, which is the traditional posture for teaching in his world, and his disciples come to him. Then he begins to speak and teaches them. This isn't for the whole crowd, it's for the disciples. Now, disciples usually means more than the 12. It means those who are his followers, but it's not quite the same as the whole crowd. Then when we get to the end of the sermon, we're told that the whole crowd were astonished at the authority with which he spoke. That's the end of chapter 7. So he's speaking, he's aiming it at his disciples, but he's being overheard, and it sounds as if the crowd grows as he's doing some of the teaching. But this is aimed at discipleship. It's the disciples, it's teaching for his followers. It's not evangelism, it's not speaking to the Pharisees, it's not for the doubters. It may be for those who aren't fully sure yet, but it's for those who are his learners, disciples, those who want to hear from him, not those who are out to get him or to criticize or to challenge, but those who want to hear him he's speaking to. And he goes through these, well, it's 8 conventional ones, then 9 becomes harder. He goes through these 9 blessings, and you'll see some complication in the way he says it. For example, blessed are the poor in spirit, the first one, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. But then the others, as he progresses, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And in most of them, the blessing that's described is a future thing, though it's a present reality. Blessed are those who mourn, that is, who mourn now, for they will be comforted. That's a future blessing, improvement, whatever. What is the blessing? Because the blessing isn't pronounced, he doesn't say they will be blessed. He says, blessed are they, for they will be comforted. The blessing is a current reality that Jesus declares, but what we might call the blessing, the content of it, the reality of it, is a future thing. Future reality described as a present reality. The Bible, there are all sorts of fancy words that theologians use to talk about this. Is it prophetic language, apocalyptic language, or whatever you want? But another one, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. So some of the fulfillment, the complete fulfillment of these promises of blessing are future. That's why we might call them promises of blessing. But they're not just promises of blessing, they are statements of blessing. They are a sort of language which makes real what it sets out to do. When Jesus makes statements, or when anyone makes statements, those can simply be a promise, which is a good thing to have, or they can be something that's a present reality, bringing about a change in circumstance, such as you are forgiven. All of a sudden becomes a present reality. It also has a future sense, in that you won't receive the penalty or the other implications of what you've done. You are forgiven, has both a future and a present reality. But this blessed is a blessed now. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. They're not seeing God now, but there is a blessing now, a deep blessing in being the pure in heart. What is the current blessing? Is it just being able to hold on to a promise? Now, that's big stuff in the Bible. The blessing for Abraham is he is counted as righteous because he has believed God's promise. And that's a model for us and for New Testament blessing. But it's not just the future promise that blesses him. There's a reality of current blessing being counted as righteousness because he has appropriated that promise. So this isn't pie in the sky when you die. It isn't the way some people would mock Christianity and saying you just allow the poor to be poor and say it'll be all right in heaven, but there's no reality of being all right now. The blessing itself is a reality, and we need to think about that and work out what that means, as well as there being a promise of a different content of blessing, a blessing where the bad state will be taken away. There is both things, an assurance of a current good state despite their bad state, and a promise of a good state in the future. That's a bit of a mouthful, but what I'm saying, I think, is perfectly clear. This isn't just pie in the sky when you die, as people mock it. Some people have trivialized it further and said it's meat on the plate while you wait, or something like that. There's something good now, as well as something good to follow. There's something good now, I think it's right to say, is the presence of Jesus. Jesus is talking in a general way, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the merciful. But he goes on to say in the last two blessings, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, and then blessed are you when people revile you. He is focusing over the course of these 9 blessings, focusing in on his hearers and saying the blessing is here and now and real and present, and it's to do with Jesus. Now, you may find that a bit of a stretch. It doesn't say it specifically in the passage, but if we're going to take this sermon as a whole, and I'm going to try to do that during this teaching series, we have to be guided in some ways by the beginning of it and by the end of it. And the end of it is Jesus insisting in chapter 7, the sheep and the goats, which isn't just a fun children's story or song. It's something very real. It's insisting everyone who hears these words of mine and obeys them will be like those whose house is founded on rock. And then when he's finished speaking, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught as one having authority, not as their scribes. So when Jesus says, blessed are you, or blessed are they, that is said with authority. Him saying it makes it true. It's not just he says it because it is true, but his saying it makes it true. That's what it is to speak with authority. And that's what he's doing here. Now, when we look at these blessings, they might just seem a little bit soft. God blesses nice people, the poor in spirit and the meek and the pure in heart. Is that what it means? I remember as a boy going to my secondary school, they had a Latin motto, as schools often did then. I'm slightly surprised it wasn't Greek, but because it was from the Sermon on the Mount, Beati Mundo Corde, blessed are the pure in heart. And we had to sing Blessed Are the Pure in Heart as our school hymn. They dropped it, singing it, I think, by the time I left. I'm quite sure it's well gone now, and I wouldn't be surprised if the motto has changed too. But how do you interpret talking to a load of schoolboys and giving them a motto, Blessed are the pure in heart? It may be that some very strange person thought children were pure in heart anyway. That's a slightly odd thing to think. I suspect they had in mind that what they wanted to do in that school, the founders of it, who gave it that motto, was to create pureness of heart by the way the school worked, by structure of teaching and discipline. They were going to, this was founded in Victorian days, they were going to knock pureness of heart into you one way or another because it wasn't there by nature. Or maybe they were a particularly kind, soft-hearted lot of educationalists who founded that school, who thought, well, we are all pure in heart. Let's just draw it out of these boys. It was boys then. Let's draw it out of these boys, the pureness that's there. Blessed are the pure in heart. Well, now let's apply a little bit of biblical thinking to this. There is such a thing as purity of heart in human terms, but it is the result of hard work and of self-discipline. It's the result of submission to God. It's the result of submission, and tough submission, to his laws. Now, we'll see more of that as we go through this Sermon on the Mount, but you'll remember some of it a bit further on towards the end of chapter 5. Jesus says, you've heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That's pureness of heart. And that isn't a natural, easy human state. That's something that has to be taught and learned and imposed by a degree of external discipline, encouragement, help, and a fair degree of self-discipline. In other words, pureness of heart, when we really understand it, is the result of struggle against natural desires to get even or to get our own way. Pureness of heart is a lovely thing when we see it, but it comes as a result of hard work. It's not an easy natural state. It's a state which is come to as a result of struggle. And when we look at these beatitudes, these blessings, we see they're all to do with struggle and with difficulty. Obviously, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, but also blessed are the peacemakers. They will be called the children of God. It's so easy when there's a strife of some sort going on, particularly if we are one side of it or the other, to one side to win, to take sides. And the peacemaker, who isn't seeking to take sides, but simply to make peace, that's a discipline and a struggle. Doubtless, as many of you have, I've done courses and things on how to resolve people's difficulties and arguments and so on. It's hard work. It really is hard work to listen to both sides and get both sides to listen to each other. It's not an easy automatic thing at all. This is struggle. And those who are struggling to do something right are hearing, you are blessed and you will be blessed. Now, sometimes the struggle might be a sort of unwilling one, those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, although you may have gone into it with your eyes open, but it's still unwilling. Sometimes it's a deliberate, willing struggle to make peace or to be pure in heart. Sometimes the struggle is an inevitable result of what we choose to do. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, those who want to see good in the world, who want to see the good blessed, who actually want to see justice done. If you decide, I want to give my life to seeing justice done and the good rewarded and the bad stopped, that's hard work. And you're putting yourself into a struggle, a huge cosmic struggle, ultimately, between good and evil. And you will suffer in that struggle because that's what happens in struggles. But, says Jesus, there's blessing in that struggle if I'm there with you in it. And you hear my words, there is blessing now to those who are struggling in that way, and there will be much more blessing in the future. But the now blessing is reality, and the future blessing is promise and will be reality. Blessed are those who mourn. Now, it can be those who are mourning the loss of loved ones, the obvious sense. But mourning can be a much broader thing than that. Mourning the sadness in the world, mourning the fact of hunger and famine, mourning the fact of wars in the world, mourning the brokenness of the world and the sinfulness and the rejection of God by people. And mourning can be something that hits you. It can be something you choose to do, or that you feel very deeply, and allow it to get under your skin. Allow the brokenness of the world to hurt you. Allow the reality of famines and wars to hurt you. It can be easy. It can be almost inevitable when we have what they call compassion fatigue. You've seen too many awful things on the news. You can't take any more. You turn it off or you ignore it because the world is so damaged and broken, and people can be so monstrous that compassion fatigue just wears you down. Or you can say, I'm going to keep that compassion going. I'm going to feel the brokenness of the world. And that's a deep sense of mourning, which will ultimately lead to comfort, but in the present reality will include blessing, because Jesus speaks blessing to those who feel that mourning. And the poor in spirit is those who know their poverty of spirit. Well, we're all poor in spirit in a way compared to where we should be, but if we know our poverty of spirit and in effect are mourning for our own lack of spirituality and lack of depth and lack of openness to God and shallowness in spiritual things, if we take that on board and really feel it, that itself is further pain and difficulty that we accept in life. It's similar to mourning, and there's blessing in being there because Jesus stands with us in that and pronounces his current blessing as well as his future blessing. Theirs is, which means will be, the kingdom of heaven. So we've seen, we can see that all these different conditions on which Jesus is pronouncing blessing are conditions of struggle and difficulty. They might seem outwardly smooth and wonderful, the graceful swan gliding across the water, and it may only be us or a few others who know the frantic paddling underneath to keep going in the right direction despite the currents and so on. But the blessing is there on those who are struggling. and it's a future blessing as well. It's a present blessing as well as a future blessing. And then finally, there's a second half to the final blessing. In verse 12, it said, "Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account." And then, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." There is a current blessing, but the future blessing is very real. Don't minimize it. Don't allow people to mock Christianity as saying pie in the sky when you die, because that is true. That is part of it. There's current blessing as well, just the presence of Jesus and knowing his presence and knowing that we're seeking to do his will and that he's with us in that. But there is future blessing, which ought to bring us great joy. Part of the present blessing is looking to the future. Part of living the Christian life is looking to the future and rejoicing in it. As the old preachers used to say, meditating on providence, looking to God's blessings and God's goodness and God's future. And there's blessing and there's joy in that. Amen.